Hello, BookTube. Years and years ago, in the dim and misty past of BookTube, there was a booktuber called Christopher Russell. He made a few videos. People liked him. People hated him. And one of his videos was just a random collection of book recommendations that he decided to make, which I thought at the time that he made it was kind of cheeky. I'm always taken a little aback when a young booktuber, decides to do a video of the top 10 X of all time, or here are some recommendations of mine, because my reflexive thought is, well, you haven't read anything. How can you make recommendations? You're going to recommend 10 books, which means that you're recommending one half of all the books you've read in your adult life. That is very dismissive. That's very snooty. Of course, that's not true. We all have large reading experiences. And I found that video fascinating. And it was all the prompt I needed to start making random book recommendations of my own. Hedgehog book recommendations, because Joe Spivey, in his infinite sesquipedalian wisdom, dubbed Christopher Russell the cartoon hedgehog of this little corner of BookTube. It's been a while since I made a Hedgehog book recommendation. I don't think I did one while the Hedgehog was actually here as my guest. So I thought I would do that today. And we will start off, of course, because David Murphy might be watching, with the Third Reich. That's David's prospective dates there in the upper Midwest. Those are his prospective dates. Well, I don't know. He talked a lot about economics at supper, but he's invited me back to his place. It seems kind of nice. I'll go. Oh, a nice little place. It's almost fanatically neat. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Oh, look. There's a swastika on the spine of one of these books. Huh. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, wait. There's another one. And another one. And another one. And another one. and then you proceed into the bedroom. And maybe you're on the bed. Maybe you're cuddling on the bed when the prospective date looks over David's shoulder at one of the low bookcases in the bedroom, and there are a whole bunch of front row books that are obviously meant to disguise or obscure the back row books. And when she looks closely, the back row books are Hitler's face on one spine after another, just glaring out at her. Just close your eyes and think of the fatherland. So we're going to start. We're going to start with the Third Reich. This is Joachim Fest. I've mentioned it before in connection with his biography of Adolf Hitler. But he also wrote a book called The Face of the Third Reich, where he does little potted biographies of all the leaders of the Third Reich. This is a very, very popular superstructure on which to hang a book. I've read 6 books that did exactly this. But Fest is really good. He's really, really good at doing this. And not everybody is. You get a professional academic, for instance, you get them, give them a brief and say, all right, well, we're doing a book and we need a biographical profile of von Ribbentrop. And they'll crack their knuckles and say, hoo, boy, you got it. All I need is 10 years and 600 pages. You tell the poor Tweety things, no, you have 30 days and I need 60 pages. They'll practically faint dead away. But Fest is really good at it. So this is terrific. Depressing, but terrific. Then we have an author who is, I believe, a little hard to find these days. The impression I get is that his hardcovers with dust jackets are incredibly expensive. But he's really, really good. His name is Alan Villiers, and this cover that I found online shows that at least at one of his books, at least at one point, had a pay-and-trade paperback, or mass market paperback. This is his book, The Set of the Sails. And he wrote a whole shelf of books on nautical matters. And he's incredible writing about nautical matters. It's wonderful. He writes about nautical history, some great sailors in his own day. He has a rather horrifying book. He did not see that it was horrifying, but a rather horrifying book about whaling. But then again, what book about whaling isn't horrifying? I try not to hold that against them, but I can't read them anymore. I just can't. I excoriated one such book that was written in the clear light of history, so to speak, not to paraphrase a much better mind than mine. But a guy wrote a book just a few years ago on joining a whaling crew. and thought it was some high adventure or whatever. Wrote about it like it was a high adventure. I'll try to remember to find a link to that book if I can. It was absolutely deplorable, despicable. It's one thing if you're doing this, you know, in the hey-ho of the long shadow of the lamplight era. You can't do it now. People do, but you can't do it now. If you're doing it now, you're doing something evil, and you know you're doing something evil. These creatures, these beings, these people have tight-knit family bonds. They have, you're swimming along, you're in a society with your mother, your aunts, your grandmother. They have an elaborate oral superstructure of probably cultural literature, handed down from generation to generation, changed by each generation, just like we change our own literature. Insane to think that we would romanticize killing these people. And a recent book did, a book that very much had no excuse. I don't know how much of an excuse Alan Villiers had, but I'm not talking about that book today. I'm talking about this one, which is mainly a strongly worded, a strongly written memoir of sailing around Cape Horn in a wind-driven vessel. Which I don't know how many of you out there are mariners of any kind. I don't know how many of you have logged any kind of time at sea. But sailing around the Horn, around Cape Horn, is mighty tricky. Even now, it can be mighty tricky. It's just the sort of place on Earth where the ocean can get tricky. And when the ocean gets tricky, you die. The ocean wants to kill you. And this is just such rousing stuff. It's so amazing. It's just so amazingly good. This is one of my favorite Alan Villiers books. He's written a lot, and a lot of them are really good. This is probably one of my favorites. But finding a hardcover with a dust jacket probably set me back $300. I haven't checked. I haven't checked on any of these things. Sorry about that. Stop it, baby. Stop it. This next one is by Michael Cooper, and it is a Starman adventure. I believe when these originally came out, they were billed as young adult. I never found them that way, unless having hope in the future is something we relegate to young adulthood, and then you don't have it after that, which seems pretty cynical. This is Mutiny on Mars with this great hardcover cover. I'm pretty sure this doesn't look like this anymore if it's still in print. But this is an adventure in the future solar system. But one of the neat things about these Starman novels is that they aren't in the incredibly distant future. They're in a... Michael Cooper describes the collapse of world society from whose ashes this world is slowly, steadily arising. And in the passages in this book where he describes that collapse, I swear, I don't know where he got his foresight, but the only thing that's missing is the word Trump. And maybe Musk, the Nazi Elon Musk. That's uncanny. That part of it is uncanny. I'm sure that it would make a full reread of these books extra uncanny. The key is not that. The key is the revival. The key is that the world is coming out of all that and having adventures and learning in this book that maybe something deeper is going on in the solar system. That maybe just because you banished evil on Earth doesn't mean... What's the matter? Are you coming over here? There you go. Up you go. There you go, baby. She's on the watch very much. She's very tense and very on the watch because it's raining on and off all day. And the rain is her mortal enemy. It didn't help any that we were caught in the rain earlier today. That didn't help any at all. But the fun and optimism of these things is what I want to recommend it for. The first one, Mutiny on Mars, definitely. Then we have something. This was cobbled together. It's graceful. It's incredibly odd. It's an odd, spiky, wonderful, intelligent book. It's called Pointing Our Thoughts: Reflections on Harvard and Higher Education from 1991 to 2001 by Neil Rudenstein, who was president of Harvard for that time. And these are reflections by him and others on Harvard at the time and also the state of the world, the state of higher education in the United States at the time. And some of you will recognize that tower. I've actually been all the way up to that window in this tower. It's fascinating. It's I hesitate. this is a recommend, definitely, because Rudenstein is such a great writer. But it's an oddly specific lens for this book. So it is a recommend, but you would have to be interested in the subject. He's not going to hook you on your own. He's assuming that you're interested in higher education and also in Harvard. And, I mean, realistically, that touches on less than 1/100th of 1% of the population. So I don't... This book did get reviewed in the popular press in some places. I imagine it would get reviewed a lot more widely if it were reissued today, because it describes a world that is completely gone. Just completely gone. Rudenstein was one of the last presidents of Harvard who still had anything like the mantle that office used to convey to the people who occupied it. As I've said on this channel many times before, at the beginning of, for instance, the 20th century, in the early 1900s, if anywhere in the country, if you had said, well, you know what the president thinks about that, most people would have said, which president? The president of the United States in the White House or the president of Harvard? And in a lot of circles, the president of Harvard had a lot more cachet. At the time, in 1904 or 1901 or whatever, the president of the United States was not thought of the way he was thought of for most of the 20th century, as a figure of clothed in immeasurable power, as Lincoln put it. People didn't think of him that way. He was just the guy who kept the wheels running in Washington, but he wasn't a potentate of any kind. Whereas the president of Harvard was usually a public intellectual, usually an incredibly formidable public intellectual. Rudenstein was, and ran an institution that the rest of the country, with varying degrees of grudging irony, admitted was going to turn out the people who were going to run things when their own kids got out of high school and went to work. And that cachet, the cachet of both the office and the institution, are very much still alive in this book, in a way that soon after, 5, 6, maybe the most 10 years later, that was no longer true. And I doubt will ever be true again. After certainly the president of Harvard now, the position is a joke now, because of a fiasco that Harvard had just a little while ago, where the president of Harvard, a candidate for president, aggressively campaigned for herself on explicitly race-baiting grounds. That I really think it'd be a good idea for you to swing your support behind me, because if you don't, it probably means you hate black people. That wouldn't sound too good, chanted on the quad, now would it? That's bad enough, but also that president then said something incredibly tone-deaf about the protests erupting about Israel's actions in Gaza. And a thing that got swept under the rug, the common thumbnail of that president's dismissal was the incredibly tactless comment about protesters, when actually that president was guilty of yards and yards and yards of plagiarism. So it's just a disgrace all around. Just a disgrace all around. The neck-bearded quasi-fascists, the outright fascists, the Trumpist commentators on YouTube, the only reason that they didn't make more hay about that whole incident a few years ago when it happened is because it's too complicated for them to follow. They're not all that bright. They're really kind of dumb. If they had been following it, the way I was following it, then they would have jumped on it right away as the ultimate vindication of every word they've ever said about DEI hires. It would have vindicated everything they think. They just didn't know it. And it was hard not to think about that whole scandal and a couple of other scandals recently while reading this book. It was hard to keep those out of my mind, even though that's not fair, because this book was written before those things happened. You can't blame an author for something that hasn't happened yet. Or even invest an author with wisdom because of something that hasn't happened yet. You can't do either one. I like this on its own. It's an odd book. Probably the oddest thing that I'll recommend in this Hedgehog roundup. This next one is by Anton Gill, and it is Il Gigante. This is the story of Michelangelo's David. Not just all that we can reconstruct of the circumstances by which he constructed the thing, but also the politics of Florence at the time, going through enormous upheavals, and what effect those upheavals had on the history of the David. Which keep in mind, art in Florence in Michelangelo's day was entirely done by the fiat of governing bodies, of governing committees. They had all the power, And they decided what you would do and when you would do it, how great an extent you would do it. Your patrons, of course, had a say, but Michelangelo didn't want to do a gigantic statue in order to have it sit in somebody's home. He wanted it to be public art. Well, that required just as much blueprints and tape work as it does today. And in the David's case especially, because there was a statue of David defeating Goliath in the exact same spot where Michelangelo wanted his own statue to go. So you were literally moving out the old and moving in the new. And oh my, was Michelangelo's David new. Oh my, was it new. I don't know how many of you have ever seen it. With your own eyes, not in on camera or whatnot. I don't know how many of you have ever seen it. And if you go now and look at it, it is surrounded by other stuff. It's practically in an open air bazaar of photo opportunities. So I don't know that you would be able really to appreciate what it must have looked like standing there stark in the sunlight, new. In the spot where up until that morning, every passerby going to market or going out to the fields was accustomed to seeing Donatello's David. And all of a sudden, that's not there anymore. And instead, this arresting thing is there. This gigantic, gorgeous, naked man standing there, looking so beautiful as to be terrifying. And hearkening back not to Ghirlandaio or any of the older Italian masters of painting or whatnot, but to Praxiteles, to the ancient world, harking back to the ancient world, only 3 times as big as anything they ever did. This author captures all of that really well. It's not often that I say that a work of art actually deserves a book of its own. That's not often that I say that. Another work of art from exactly the same time period by a person that Michelangelo knew is also a little bit hard to really appreciate in its current setting, and that is the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. If you look at the David now, you're looking at the David surrounded by other stuff that you are supposed to also look at. And if you look at the Mona Lisa now, you look at it over the tops of the heads of 300 people behind bulletproof glass. So really, for a lot of people, books like this will be the only way that they get at what it was like to see those things in the fresh morning of their creation. It's really, really good. It's a little book. It's a micro history. I wouldn't say that it's a great Renaissance history book, but if you've got a Renaissance shelf already going and you want little things to fill in the gaps, this is one of them. Then we have something by Hesketh Pearson. This is old. Mine did not have this cover. This is Johnson and Boswell, where Pearson decides to take a biographical approach to Samuel Johnson and James Boswell, but together, which is at first a little counterintuitive in a couple of different ways. Isn't Johnson and Boswell pretty much 95% overlapping with Boswell's Life of Johnson, which of course you cannot compete with? Isn't it pretty much that? And also, if it's that, if it overlaps on that 95% of ground, well, doesn't it face the same problem, which is how little time Boswell actually spent with Johnson? Can you really do a dual biography of these two? They took a trip together. They occasionally spoke or had a meal together when Boswell was in town, but it's not like they were inseparable. Like this cover, I don't know where this cover comes from, but it works. This is a dual biography. They have inherent weaknesses, but this works. It's very lively, very scholarly, but also very lively. About Johnson and Boswell, I have to admit, I haven't read this in a long time, in decades, but my memory of it is pretty good, and I remember the Johnson part being definitely the weaker half of the book. Boswell that might be predictable. Boswell is more comprehensible than Johnson. For Johnson, you need to bring a lot more of what the preppers call situational awareness to bear. He's not a normal person. It's not a question of just overcoming the oddities of the different time period. Once you overcome those oddities and learn the new conventionalities of the time, of the coffee houses and whatnot, Boswell leaps into focus. He's immediately comprehensible once you do that. once you understand the money and the way the society worked and disease and alcohol and whatnot, Boswell leaps into focus. Johnson never does. No matter how much of that you do. He was odd. Deeply, deeply odd. A genius. A gigantic genius in every sense of the word. But he doesn't leap into focus, and that shows. It's hard to find a good biography of Johnson that does what we expect biographies to do today, which is to examine the subject from the inside out. Notice, Boswell's Life of Johnson doesn't do that at all. It doesn't even think that's possible. Instead, it is the greatest possible outside-in look at anyone that we have ever got in any way. But that's not the fashion. In our biographies today, we like to get inside the subject. And that's a daunting task to do with Johnson. He usually defeats people who try. I have a whole shelf of Johnson biographies that I read mostly for the details, not mostly for that at all. And if I remember correctly, Pearson doesn't do the best job in the world with that, but it's still really enjoyable. And then we have something that is unconventional, but oh my, the hours you will lose in browsing through this thing. The hours you will lose. It is a masterpiece. I don't think it's in print anymore, so I don't think people acknowledge that. But this is Dorian Kindersley. This is DK, the DK publisher. You will know, if you know that publisher, you'll know they have a knack for visual presentation of stuff. Their ability to make pages pop with visuals and text together is amazing. And I think that talent, that institutional talent, was never greater than this book, The Ultimate Visual Dictionary. An incredible work of reference that shows you, it doesn't just tell you, it shows you how hundreds and hundreds of things work, how they're put together, what they look like, what their proportions are. Oh, it's just incredible. The text is incredible too, but the visuals in here are amazing. Just amazing. I had, for a long time when I worked in the analog world, no computers, no internet, when you worked like that at your desk writing, you had to have a reference shelf right next to you, right within reach. You didn't want to be getting up because you were going to be using it. You needed a big dictionary for word etymologies and also hard to find words. I also had a smaller dictionary just for spelling, stuff that would not stick in my mind no matter how many times I looked up how to spell it. No spell check, no nothing like that. So you needed both. I needed both those dictionaries. I never needed a thesaurus, but I very much liked having books of quotations, reference works, historical timelines, and right at the end of that period, when I was leaving that period of my life, I upgraded the visual. I had a visual dictionary all along, but it wasn't all that good. It wasn't all that complete. It wasn't all that up to date, and it wasn't color with photographs. Right at the end of that period, I upgraded that book to this book, and I have no idea what happened to my copy. None at all. But it's amazing. And unlike most of the books, let's face it, all of the books on this list, this is also amazing to go through with kids. Just if they're feeling, if they're not bouncing off the walls, just sit them down and go through a few pages of this book. They will be fascinated. Fascinated. So a strong, odd recommend. Then we have a novel from probably 30 years ago, more than that. This is by R.M. Berry, who I've never read in any other way. It's the only thing I've ever read by R.M. Berry. And this is Leonardo's Horse, a dual-frame historical novel at a time when dual-frame historical novels weren't common, where the present-day thing is a massive, gigantic traffic jam. And our main character in the present day is in that traffic jam, and he is lamenting about his literary struggles, his struggles with his work. And the historical part is Leonardo da Vinci in many different periods of his life, but the point of the book is the gigantic equestrian statue that he was going to do for Milan, for the city of Milan. And when I say gigantic, I mean this thing was going to be bigger than anything that had ever been created up until then by the hand of man, even buildings. And Leonardo famously didn't finish it. And famously, the history is a little bit opaque on why he didn't finish it. I think it's pretty obvious why he didn't finish it, but I think the reason he didn't finish it is because he quickly realized that the plan he had made and got financed was actually physically impossible by the technology of his day. It could be just that the money ran out, but either way, this author does a great job with Leonardo. Leonardo has been the subject of historical fiction many times, almost all failures. He is also extremely hard to capture in fiction. I tried it myself. I wrote a 1,000-page historical novel called 1515. Takes place in the year 1515, and Leonardo was one of my characters. I researched him to a fare thee well, and he was the only character. All of my 10 characters in that book are actual historical characters, and not only that, but real historical people and famous ones. And I researched all of them and got a handle on all of them except Leonardo. I did not get a handle on him. Even, well, anyway, both halves of this book are really good. They don't blend together perfectly at the end, but then again, that's the problem with dual time frame narratives in novels. They never blend together well. They never do. I think of an example where that has ever worked really well. I don't know of one. The most popular example in history, the most popular example in broad culture of a dual narrative historical work is not a novel. It's the movie Titanic. And even the movie Titanic does not, it doesn't line up. You don't want to think about it. You shouldn't think about it. You should just be swept away by how wonderful the movie is. But if you do start to think about it, the dual narratives don't line up. They don't make much sense. And the same thing is true here at the end. But boy, was it enjoyable up until then. And I could name, there are a whole bunch of other, we'll get to them in other Hedgehog recommendations. This one's going long, is it not? So the next one we'll come back to Bernard Berenson. He came up recently because one of you sent Donahue Library Book Sale Tribute, and you sent me a hardcover of Being Bernard Berenson, a great biography. Bernard Berenson was an art connoisseur and also the art procurer for Isabella Stewart Gardner here in Boston. And he wrote a bunch of books. And probably the most famous one is The Italian Painters of the Renaissance. Sorry about this cover. I just grabbed it off the internet. I don't know what to do about this cover. This is wonderful. I mean, I sometimes speak of him in slightly derogatory terms, but he really knew his subject and was definitely enthusiastic about it. So I'm assuming that The Italian Painters of the Renaissance is free on Project Gutenberg. I don't know if it has art. Probably doesn't. What I would suggest, if you have a used bookstore near you that's any good, would be wait around, keep in mind looking for this book in one of the many large illustrated editions that have come out in the last 100 years. I'm remembering one in particular it was basically a coffee table book, but it had the whole text of painters of the Italian Renaissance and beautiful artwork, full color photos. Something like that. It doesn't have to be that one, but something that enhances just the book would be best, especially since you should have a lot of those to pick from. Then we have something by Dennis Tilden Lynch. This is, I think, from 100 years ago. This is An Epoch and a Man. It's the story of Martin Van Buren, and it's actually really good. Martin Van Buren is an odd figure in U.S. presidential history. He's not particularly dramatic in a lot of ways. He is boring, outright boring in a lot of ways. But this book is not boring. Lynch manages to make his story and the story of his broader time, the politics of his day on Capitol Hill, amazingly good reading. Don't know how rare this is. Don't know if anybody has a copy with a dust jacket. The only one I could find online had no dust jacket. But as far as presidential biographies go, I don't think that Martin Van Buren has had a better one than this. Certainly not a more readable one. And then we can finish up. Well, let's finish up with the latest translation of the short stories of Isaac Babel. This is translated by Peter Constantine, and this was a beautiful slipcase edition from, I think, W.W. Norton did this, with an introduction and notes and a really good translation, really character-filled translation, so that you get a sense of what the fuss is, which is what a translator should do. I read an earlier mass market collection of some stories of Isaac Babel, and I didn't see what the fuss was about. I'm 100% convinced that was because the translation wasn't all that good. But this I could not put down, and I wish that I still had a copy. I wish I still had that slipcase. It is worth being in your library, any library. I think there was a trade paperback as well, but I would want the hardcover and the slipcase. And these stories are wonderful. They are wonderful. The overall story of the author is incredibly sad, but the stories are wonderful. So there you go. just a handful of random Hedgehog book recommendations to get you through your day. So I will wrap this up for now, and maybe we'll do another of these tomorrow. Maybe not, but maybe. So anyway, I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.